Rome, holy city, blessed by pagan gods. Earthly capital of a glorious empire with a divine mission to conquer and rule. But Rome was to cast aside its pantheon of idols to embrace a revolutionary new faith from the East that would change its classical skyline forever. Personal salvation and the worship of one God eclipsed the gods of old. Soon after the crucifixion of Jesus, his message started to spread, but there was nothing inevitable about its ultimate triumph. The followers of Christ were viciously persecuted. But the martyrdom of St. Peter gave Rome a new founding story and a divine mission for his successors, the popes. Rome became a vibrant center of Christian devotion, but it was the necessities of power that really decided its sacred destiny. I've come as both historian and tourist to examine how the decision of one emperor changed the history of Western civilization and Rome itself. Its impact on the fabric of the city and on the lives of its citizens, nobles, and high priests. Abandoning paganism risked everything that Rome stood for, triggering confusion, violence, power struggles, and setting popes and emperors on a collision course. So what transformed the holy city of Rome from the pagan heart of the Roman Empire to the capital of Christendom? On the outskirts of Rome, a stadium once stood. Horse races were staged there to entertain emperors and citizens. But in 64 AD, the imperial racetrack became the site for a mass execution. The center of Rome had been devastated by fire. Angry Romans wanted someone to blame. So Emperor Nero offered them a new religious sect, the Christians. Some were torn to pieces by wild dogs. Others set on fire as human torches. And a few were crucified. Amongst them was Peter, a leader of the Christian mission in Rome and one of the original 12 disciples. Tradition says that out of respect for Jesus, he asked to be crucified upside down. In the center of the racetrack stood an obelisk. This is that same obelisk, and 2,000 years later, it's still in roughly the same place. It was probably the last thing that Peter saw. And this is probably the last thing that he could have imagined. St. Peter's, the magnificent basilica, built in his honor and still towering over the city of Rome. Ultimately, Peter's execution would transform Rome. But when he died, Christianity was just one of many Eastern cults struggling to survive in a city dominated by pagan gods. For 1,000 years, paganism had brought success and prosperity to the eternal city. The will of the gods decided every aspect of Roman society. When it went to war, who its rulers were. Paganism had brought Rome domination of the ancient world. The Roman Empire was flexible, embracing and co-opting foreign gods into its own state religion, but none so far had threatened the status quo. But Christianity was radically different. Whereas paganism sought the goodwill and protection of the gods in this life, Christianity held out the promise of eternal life in the next world. But its rejection of pagan practice marked it out. Christian refusal to sacrifice to the ancestral gods in honor of the emperor made them a potential threat to the Roman state itself. As Christianity took hold amongst Rome's underclasses, the pagan establishment sought to discredit it. The ritual of Holy Communion, the taking of Christ's body and blood, was described as cannibalism. Yet, meeting in secret, the Christian community began to grow. Historian Alexander Ethers is taking me to one of Rome's remaining house churches from the 2nd century. What took place in private dwellings like this would sow the seeds of Rome's unique Christian future. So what was the early church in Rome really like?
Initially, you can safely say it was an unorganized heap of people and hardly any structure there, a large group, a growing group within the city of Rome, but not united. And there are differences of opinion about how to worship, where to worship, and gradually, eventually, you have those single figures of authority rising to the fore, the bishop who can pull it all together.
So where did the early bishops of Rome get their authority from?
From a fairly early point onwards, they're beginning to place themselves in one line with the Apostle Peter. It was the right hand of Christ, who supposedly was the first bishop of Rome. Where that tradition comes from is not entirely clear, but that tradition, I'm the successor to Peter, gives them an enormous source of authority.
The lineage of bishops from St. Peter is known as the apostolic succession. It's the bedrock of the Bishop of Rome's authority and papal power to this day. But in the 3rd century, the bishops were leaders of a religion on the margins. And that's why I'm heading to the outskirts of Rome and the catacombs of San Callisto. Deep within its maze of underground corridors, there's something hard to find and yet very important. Early evidence of how the bishops of Rome got their unique title. This reads PP, which stands for Papa or Pope, and it's the first example we have of an inscription that refers to the bishops of Rome by that title. At the time, a charismatic bishop anywhere in Christendom might have been known as Pope, but gradually the bishops of Rome came to be known by that name, though surprisingly, it wasn't for almost 800 years until the 11th century that it became official. But there's something else down here that I really want to see. Some of Rome's very first popes were buried in these subterranean tombs. What an extraordinary room this is. This is the crypt of the popes, and 9 of the bishops of Rome are buried here, dating all the way back to the early 3rd century. It's an extraordinary thought that these men were the leaders of Christianity right at the very beginning, long before the papacy became the office of power, magnificence, and wealth that we know today. But some of these bishops, just like St. Peter, were to die for their faith. Sixtus II was celebrating Mass right here at the altar when Roman soldiers burst in. When they drew their swords, the entire congregation competed to offer themselves for the honour of martyrdom, at which Sixtus pushed himself forward, bared his neck, and begged them to take his head. The soldiers were happy to take him up on his offer. They beheaded him on the spot. The persecution of the Christians wasn't constant. When the Roman Empire prospered, the Church was reluctantly tolerated. But in the mid-3rd century, the empire tottered on the edge of catastrophe. Rome faced 50 years of disaster, civil wars, invasions, and a bewildering succession of emperors. The cracks in the imperial edifice seemed terminal. Some emperors believed that Rome was being punished for turning a blind eye to the Christians. The unity of city and empire was at stake. Something had to be done. In 303, the Emperor Diocletian launched the bloodiest persecution to date. Churches were destroyed, bishops decapitated. The streets were awash with the blood of the faithful. But the killings failed. The persecutions merely served to promote and advertise the faith of the martyrs. The flame of Christianity could not be extinguished. Diocletian's victims would forever leave their mark on Rome. And remarkably, one has been preserved to this day. This figure, one of the city's least known but macabre sights, appears to be a statue. But closer inspection reveals something far more spine-chilling. When at first you look at this, you think this must be a waxwork. But when you look a little closer into the slightly open mouth, you see through the open lips of the skeleton. And if you look at the hands on the outside, they appear to be wax. But look inside, you can see not just the skeletal bones of the real hand and the body, but actually the dry skin there too. This is the body of Saint Vittoria. The cruel deaths of the martyrs didn't destroy Christianity. Their stories kept it alive. But it was still just one of many religious sects on the edges of Roman society. Only the whim or faith of an emperor could change the course of history. Emperor Constantine was a ruthless general who slashed his way to power. He was a harsh warlord, capable of terrifying violence. He even executed his own wife and son. But he was also a visionary who, in one decision, changed the entire course of Western civilization. No one knows for sure why Constantine chose to embrace Christianity. But the decisive revelation took place here at Milvian Bridge, on the outskirts of Rome. The overextended empire had been split in two, east and west. Rome was no longer the imperial capital. Each region was ruled by an emperor and his deputy. Constantine shared the west with Maxentius, but they soon became bitter rivals. In 312, Constantine had cornered Maxentius's forces on the banks of the Tiber. Before battle commenced, Constantine had a vision. He saw the sign of the cross superimposed on the sun with the words, "By this sign thou shalt conquer." At the very last moment, he ordered his soldiers' shields to be emblazoned with the cross. Fighting under Christian banners, he won the greatest victory of his life. Constantine now saw Christ not as the crucified Lamb of God, but as a potent God of victory. He was about to turn his back on everything that had made Rome. Exchange the protection of many gods for just one. Overturn 1,000 years of Roman history and embrace the faith of persecuted radicals. But could Rome withstand this revolution? Constantine was willing to take that gamble. But while an emperor could change his religion overnight, Rome's pagan citizens would take longer. The arch built to mark Constantine's victory shows how controversial this change of policy was. This arch contains a surprise. If you look up here on line 3, you'll see that the divinity that Constantine thanks for his victory is subtly ambiguous. It could be either Christian or pagan. Constantine doesn't give thanks to the pagan god of war, but neither does he reveal his new faith. He uses a general term for divinity, divinitas, which was acceptable to both pagans and Christians. Promoting Christianity in a world where the majority was still pagan would need tact and diplomacy, even from an all-conquering emperor. Constantine's cautious approach to conversion is reflected in the 4th century church of Santa Pudenziana. The facade of this church wouldn't have looked at all out of place in pagan Rome. It's a basilica, literally a king's hall. And this was the typical rectangular building of Roman public life where emperors and governors held court. The need to fit in is further revealed when you step inside. The image of a humble savior has received a grand Roman makeover. Jesus isn't nailed to the cross like a common criminal. He's depicted ostentatiously on a throne like a king or an emperor. And his disciples are dressed in the togas of the aristocracy, like senators holding court in a classical city. Pagan Romans coming in here wouldn't have been shocked or put off by anything they saw. But this wasn't the lower class radical religion of the early church. This was imperial Christianity, designed to impress and attract Romans high and low. Christianity was becoming Roman. Rome was becoming Christian. But Rome's rebirth as a sacred city of Christendom required a transfer of holiness from Christianity's first holy city. Constantine dispatched his mother Helena on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Helena returned with a precious collection of Christian relics. And I'm just about to witness the most monumental treasure of them all. This is one of the Empress Helena's most extraordinary finds, the Scala Sancta. This staircase is believed to be from the palace of Pontius Pilate in Jerusalem. Jesus walked down these steps after he was sentenced to death. Unlike the remote pagan gods, the Christian God had a son whom he had sacrificed for humanity. And what Jesus Christ had touched, his followers also wanted to touch. For centuries, pilgrims have climbed these steps on their knees as an act of piety to get closer to Christ and honor his suffering. It's not often in our secular age that you see a place of such intense, passionate devotion. But this tells you something about Rome as a holy city. A holy city is a place where God meets man. And that is exactly what these pilgrims are doing. While Helena was importing holiness from Jerusalem, Constantine was keen to promote the city's homegrown Christian sites. But he had to be careful. Rome was still overwhelmingly pagan, and that's why he built his first churches away from the center. Constantine built 7 churches in Rome, but one took on supreme importance. Nero's circus had become a holy place for Rome's Christians as the location of Peter's crucifixion and burial. A simple shrine had been erected over his grave. Constantine recognized the importance of the site, a direct link between Rome and Jesus Christ himself through his right-hand man, Peter. So Constantine decided to build his biggest basilica over Peter's tomb. Constantine's basilica gave Rome's Christians a new focus for devotion. It stood for over 1,000 years, until it was rebuilt during the Renaissance. Jesus said that Peter would be the rock on which his church was built. Constantine's basilica literally fulfilled that prophecy. Over the centuries, St. Peter's was to become the cornerstone of the Catholic Church and the headquarters for an empire of Christian souls. But when Constantine commissioned it, it was still an act of wishful thinking. Constantine's St. Peter's promoted Rome as a Christian center, but he died leaving a hybrid holy city, part Christian but part pagan. The temples of the old gods still dominated the skyline. Pagans still dominated the city. Constantine's divine gamble now lay in the hands of Rome's new high priests. It was now down to the popes, Rome's bishops, to really make Rome Christian. Before Constantine, Rome's bishops had been persecuted leaders. Now, they were important officials with real influence. One pope, Damasus I, reveled in this new status. Nearly 70 when he came to power, Damasus didn't allow old age to dampen his pleasures. Corrupt and egotistical, his enemies described him as a smooth-talking adulterer, or as they put it, a tickler of the ears of middle-aged women. But Damasus was also a poet who used his literary gifts to win Christian souls. He took Rome's earliest sites of martyrdom and celebrated them in poetry. This poetical propaganda has been studied by Marianne Shaggy, a historian whom I'm meeting at the Church of Sant'Agnese.
Pope Damasus went into every single catacomb, more than 60 catacombs, placing poetic inscriptions above the holy graves. Damasus's inscriptions were like huge billboards in the labyrinthine darkness of the catacombs, and it attracted huge throngs, huge crowds to the graves of the martyrs.
What was Damasus's impact on the church?
Damasus understood and saw the power radiating from the holy ashes and the holy relics, and therefore he wanted to put the stamp of the church on these tombs of the martyrs.
Damasus had created a ring of holy sites around the city. But Christianity faced a stiffer challenge in the center of Rome. Culturally, Romans were still attached to the rhythms and festivals of the pagan calendar, which promised feasting and fun. Christianity had to compete on a social level too. By a mixture of accident and design, the Christian calendar began to overlap with the pagan. St. Peter's birthday coincided with the Charistia, a pagan festival of banqueting and gift-giving. By the end of the 4th century, Romans could have 2 parties, one pagan, one Christian, on 14 days of the year. Some Christians even continued to participate in the shameless immodesty of the Lupercalia fertility festival, running half naked through the streets while whipping girls with strips of goat hide. To persuade Rome's citizens to fully embrace Christianity, Damasus turned his gift for propaganda to the city's greatest spiritual asset. Damasus had claimed Rome for St. Peter, and now, cleverly, he claimed St. Peter for Rome. St. Peter had been martyred in Rome, and therefore he was a Roman citizen. And this gave his direct heirs, the bishops of Rome, special authority. By commandeering St. Peter's legacy for the city, Damasus asserted Rome's primacy in the wider church and enhanced the status of Christianity at home. Meanwhile, events beyond the reaches of the empire were to have a devastating effect on Rome, changing the holy city forever. By the beginning of the 5th century, barbarian tribes were on the move. The Huns migrated into Central Europe, displacing the Germanic Goths, who became refugees on the borders of the Roman Empire. Defenseless and hungry, the Goths were forced to trade their own children for food, but the Romans sold them dog meat. Tensions reached boiling point, and the barbarians mobilized. With the Western Empire weakened by dynastic infighting, the Goths, under their king Alaric, made a bold move. Rome was no longer the imperial capital, but it was the symbol of empire. Bewitched by its faded glories, Alaric wanted a share in its majesty. But what he really wanted, like every barbarian, was to be a Roman. Alaric besieged Rome and tried to cut a deal. He wanted land for the Goths to settle. Rome's elite, inheritors of an illustrious past, refused to meet the demands of impertinent barbarians. Alaric's response was chilling. The thicker the grass, he said, the easier to scythe it down. His dagger was at the throat of the Western Empire, but still no compromise could be found. Starvation set in. The Romans couldn't bury their dead inside the city walls, so putrefying bodies littered the streets. Desperate to put the population out of its misery, a noblewoman opened the city gates. Alaric's 40,000 Goths burst in. Mansions were plundered, the rich were tortured to give up their treasure, and those who couldn't flee were terrorized or killed, their women raped. The Goths were Arians, a sect of heretical Christians, so they showed some restraint. They respected the sanctity of the holy sites. St. Peter's was left unscathed, and by the standards of barbarian sackings, this one was less barbaric than expected. Nevertheless, the psychological effect of the sacking was shattering. The city that had conquered the whole world was believed to have been murdered. A sense of instability pervaded Rome. The great theologian of the day, St. Augustine, believed that the reason Rome had fallen was because it was still essentially pagan and steeped in sin. The kingdom of heaven was the only salvation. The imperial city was doomed. Rome's mythological past, its founding fathers Romulus and Remus, couldn't be erased. Paganism was still deeply ingrained. But one pope who witnessed the sacking, Leo the Great, saw a way of channeling the prestige of the pagan world into the magnificence of the Christian. To find out how Leo shaped the Christian identity of Rome, I'm meeting historian Michel René Saltzman. Michel, how did Pope Leo promote Christianity in a city that still had such a strong classical Roman tradition?
Leo was very proud of the Roman tradition and the pagan past. He's the first pope to actually mention Romulus and Remus and to take pride in the Roman Empire in one of his sermons. But a better empire, a stronger empire, a greater empire resides with Christ. And so he is very involved in maintaining the physical fabric of the city, but as a Christian center.
So what was Leo's personal relationship with St. Peter?
Leo felt very intimately connected to St. Peter. Of course, every bishop could claim that their authority comes from Peter, the very first bishop of Rome. But Leo makes it a very intimate tie. In his ordination sermons, he talks about Peter's spirit almost living through him. And I think it's very telling that when Leo is buried, he is the first pope buried in St. Peter's. So that tie, that intimate tie, lives on forever.
Leo had exploited the unique link between Rome and St. Peter to mobilize the Christian spirit of the city. But it was also a reminder to the wider church that bishops of Rome were the ultimate authority in Christendom. And this new confidence was reflected in the center of the city. In just over a century since the time of Constantine, the pagan city was now infused with the spirit of St. Peter. Pristine, lavishly decorated churches overshadowed the temples to the old gods. Rome now had the skyline of a Christian capital. One God, one credo, one pope. But with spiritual authority concentrated in one figure, Rome's fate was now bound to one man. A good pope could lead the holy city to further glory. A bad pope would spell disaster. By 536, Rome and all of Italy was controlled by barbarian Christian kings. The Emperor Justinian ruled the entire Eastern Empire from Constantinople. He had a vision of reuniting the old Roman Empire with himself as Christ's sacred emperor. The jewel of Italy was, of course, the old imperial capital, but to control Rome, Justinian needed a puppet pope. So he cut a deal with Vigilius, the greedy papal ambassador to the east. Vigilius agreed to be Justinian's pope in return for the sum of 700 pounds of gold. But first, Justinian had to take Italy from the Goths. He dispatched an expedition under his brilliant general, Count Belisarius. In a remarkable display of military virtuosity, Belisarius, with just a few thousand men, captured Rome. Justinian ousted the old pope and installed Vigilius. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. Vigilius now regarded himself as the direct heir of St. Peter. Justinian, Christ's vice-regent on earth, had little time for self-promoting bishops. The two were on collision course. Vigilius tried to assert Rome's authority, but he was ineffectual, pleasing nobody. Eventually, Justinian's patience snapped. He kidnapped the Pope and sent him back to the east. As the Pope's boat left the Tiber wharf, his reputation was in tatters. The crowd threw stones and yelled insults. Vigilius was even more humiliated in Constantinople. He called a council of bishops, but it descended into a brawl. Vigilius sought refuge in the palace church. He clung to the altar, but was dragged out by his beard and forced to sign a document recognizing Justinian's supremacy. Justinian's attempt to harness Rome's holy authority had all but destroyed it. The papacy had hit its lowest point, and the city would follow. The Eastern Empire struggled to hold Italy. Within less than a generation, another Germanic tribe had its sights on Rome. The Lombards marched south, first plundering, then settling. By 590, Rome was desperate and battle-scarred. Rome's aqueducts, the embodiment of imperial might, were left to crumble, the city's vital water supplies seeping away. Impoverished and starving, its population reduced to 90,000. The once glorious capital was now just a beleaguered outpost on the fringes of empire. Rome needed a new hero, and the Pope was the only and last person who could save the city. Cometh the hour, cometh the man. Gregory was a super-rich aristocrat who had already served as city prefect, in effect, mayor of Rome. But the messy business of politics disgusted him, and he suffered an existential crisis. He craved a life of quiet contemplation. Resigning his city post, he withdrew to the family mansion here on the Cælian Hill, which he converted into a monastic community. A church dedicated to Gregory, Gregorio Magno, now stands on the same site. And his spirit lives on in the custodians of the church, the monks of the Camaldolese order. Freed from the stresses of public office, the years spent in prayer and reflection here were the happiest of Gregory's life. This is said to be Gregory's monastic cell, but there's a feature of this room that a lot of visitors miss. That's behind this grille. If you open it, look inside, there's just room in there for a small man to sleep. This is a very serene place, and it must have seemed as if Gregory would never return to the dirty world of power and intrigue. But Gregory's seclusion was short-lived. Rome was cut off from Constantinople by Lombard forces and all but abandoned by imperial officials. In a city on the verge of collapse, only one organization was left standing: the church. Reluctantly, Gregory was drawn back into civil affairs. Ordained against his will, he ran a section of the city, and when Pope Pelagius died of plague, he was elected his successor. Gregory took charge of running the city, and he proved to be brilliant at planning, finance, and diplomacy. He bought a truce with the Lombards and paid the wages of the military. Buongiorno. Pizza, prego. He donated his estates in southern Italy and Sicily to the church and used them to feed the hungry Romans. Gregory set up welfare centers across the city, and he himself dined with 12 poor people every day. Gregory had expanded his religious power into the realm of political authority, but he had set his sights much further afield. No pope before had seriously thought about taking Christianity into faraway pagan lands. When he was a young deacon, Gregory had seen some fair-haired Anglo-Saxon boys at a Roman slave market. When he was told they were Anglo-Saxon, he said, "They're not Angles, they're angels." Now he was keen to expand papal powers and convert new peoples. He dispatched a mission to England that was remarkably successful. At Christmas 597, 10,000 Angles were baptized as Christians. Gregory's missionary successes made Rome the holy city of the West. Pilgrims from Europe's northern territories came in their thousands. The religious gold rush was intensified by the ever stronger belief in the sacred power of martyrs' tombs and relics. Guidebooks from the period ignore Rome's classical monuments, directing visitors instead to Christian sites associated with the lives of the martyrs. At the Church of San Lorenzo, pilgrims could see the actual grill on which St. Lawrence was roasted. At the Church of San Sebastiano, they could see the arrows that had pierced the side of the great martyr. Gruesome stories of the sadistic torments suffered by early Christians were compiled and repeated, stories that horrified and enthralled Rome's new spiritual tourists. But there was a darker side to the pilgrim boom. Everybody literally wanted a piece of the martyrs. Soon, there was a macabre black market in the wizened body parts of the saints. Sometimes, they just snatched the entire body. The trafficking in body parts appalled Pope Gregory, who believed that contact with the supernaturally powerful bones brought instant death. But Gregory understood the value of relics. He had special boxes made containing filings from the chains of St. Peter, and by sending them to bishops in faraway territories, he strengthened their loyalty to the Pope. Pilgrimage to the Holy City paid rich dividends for the papacy. Holy travelers returned home with relics, but also with Roman practices, which allowed Gregory to become the arbiter and leader of Christianity across Europe. When Gregory died in 604, he was buried in St. Peter's, where his epitaph read, "God's consul." He'd enriched and empowered the papacy, combining the old with the new. He was truly the high priest of city and church. The Pope now headed the most influential organization in Western Europe, and Rome was its power base. The modern papacy, as we know it, was taking shape. But Rome now faced a completely new threat. A new religious revelation was on the march: Islam. In a few decades, the Arabs had conquered a vast empire. They captured Jerusalem, leaving Rome the one and only holy city of Christendom. Rome feared it would be next. The city needed an ally. Charlemagne, king of the Franks, was a gifted soldier statesman who had conquered much of Western and Central Europe. But he aspired to the highest crown of all, Roman emperor. As a devout Christian, he craved Rome's stamp of approval. But he didn't need to conquer Rome. Rome would come to him. On the 25th of April, 799, Pope Leo III was near here on his way to the church of San Lorenzo in Lucina when he was ambushed by armed retainers of the previous pope. They tried to gouge out his eyes and slice off his tongue. Pope Leo needed Charlemagne's protection from his rivals and from the threat of Arab and Lombard invasion. And Leo could offer Charlemagne the one thing he didn't already have. There was a story told in this fresco that Pope Sylvester had healed Constantine the Great of leprosy. Sylvester's reward was Constantine's conversion to Christianity. But that wasn't the only thing that Constantine was said to have given the Pope. Pope Sylvester is in firm control. He's sitting on his throne, and there's the Emperor Constantine, kneeling and compliantly surrendering his crown to the dominant Pope. This account was a complete fabrication, but it allowed Leo to invent a new tradition, the power of popes to anoint emperors. On Christmas Day 800, Charlemagne arrived to celebrate Mass in St. Peter's. He knelt down before the tomb. As he bent down, the Pope placed a crown on his head and anointed him Holy Roman Emperor. The new imperial alliance seemed to increase papal authority and protect Rome. But actually, it was flawed from the start. The popes believed that they were the ultimate source of political and religious authority, so only a pope could crown an emperor. But the emperors believed that they were the supreme power, so an emperor could appoint the pope, whose job it was to crown him. The deal didn't live up to its promise. In 846, Arab forces attacked the city. For the first time, St. Peter's Basilica, the essence of Rome's sanctity, was wrecked and looted. When the raiders had gone, Pope Leo IV put his faith in something more solid. It's easy to forget that St. Peter's was still outside the city walls and therefore vulnerable to attack. Now Pope Leo embarked on building these massive fortifications. The Leonine walls were 40 feet high and 12 feet deep, and they forever changed the shape of Rome. source of Rome's divine power was now not just sanctified, but fortified. Rome's holiness was protected, only for it to be poisoned from the inside. As the political power of the popes had grown, their position became highly sought after. The papacy became the prize and plaything in the blood-spattered power struggle between competing Italian families. Several popes were murdered here at the Castel Sant'Angelo, once the mausoleum of the Emperor Hadrian, and now the fortress, prison, and torture chamber of the papacy. The popes became power-hungry players in the savage scheming of Italian politics. And their abuse of papal authority dragged the Holy City into its darkest period yet. In 897, Pope Stephen VI gave an order of the most twisted and malicious kind. He ordered the digging up of the corpse of a former pope whom he hated. Pope Formosus' mummified body was dressed up in papal robes, propped up on a mock throne, and put on trial before the Holy Synod. His crime? Violation of canon law. The charges were read out, and a deacon was assigned to defend the accused pope. Found guilty as charged, Formosus was stripped and mutilated. The 3 fingers he used for papal blessings were chopped off. He was dragged and tossed into the Tiber. But this grisly masquerade was only the start. From now on, nothing was sacred. The popes played a vicious game of power and pleasure. No crime was too diabolical for these heirs of St. Peter. In the early 10th century, the papacy became dominated by one aristocratic family, the debauched and merciless house of Theophylact. The scurrilous chronicler of their rise to power was Bishop Liutprand of Cremona. Liutprand doesn't exactly hold back, especially with the women of the family, who are described without exception as a tribe of sex-mad megalomaniacs. He says Count Theophylact's wife, Theodora, was a shameless harlot, and that her 2 daughters were, if anything, faster in the exercise of Venus. The most infamous was Marozia. A wily politician and a murderous man-eater, Marozia must have been as gorgeously depraved as she was dynastically effective. She seduced or married an entire apostolic succession of popes and kings and managed to dominate Rome for years. Drawn deeper into the mire, Rome's once mighty popes became pawns in the cesspit of local politics. At just 15, Marozia had a wicked affair with Pope Sergius III, producing a son. Later, Marozia became mistress of another pope, John X, but she turned against him and married his enemy, Guy of Tuscany. In 928, they successfully carried out a coup d'etat in the Lateran Palace, the papal residence. Marozia had John X arrested, imprisoned, and then strangled in the Castel Sant'Angelo, leaving her as de facto ruler of the city. The papacy and Rome sank to ever greater depths of moral depravity. Marozia even raised her own bastard son to the throne of St. Peter. But things began to fall apart for Marozia. Her other son, Alberic, invaded Rome, arrested John XI and imprisoned his mother in the Castel Sant'Angelo. Marozia died in there, probably murdered by her own son. As for Alberic, he ruled Rome for 20 years with the majestic title, Prince and Senator of all the Romans. The Holy City was on its knees. The emperors, once Rome's protectors, were now in the ascendant, dominating Italy. The Holy Roman Emperors, successors of Charlemagne and in effect kings of Germany, repeatedly marched south to attack Rome and terrorize its popes. Only a few popes had the strength to fight back by reinvigorating papal authority and the sanctity of the city. In 1075, Pope Gregory VII took a stand. He published the Dictatus Papae that declared the absolute supremacy of the papacy and Rome. From now on, emperors would bow to popes. Gregory's posturing infuriated the German Emperor Henry IV. He deposed the Pope. But Gregory hit back, excommunicating Henry, in effect stripping him of all his powers. The toxic relationship between Pope and Emperor had ignited, and Rome was its victim. Gregory allied himself with the Normans, but when they occupied the city in 1084, things turned violent. Rome became a blazing inferno. A 1,000 years earlier, a pagan emperor had burned Christians alive and crucified St. Peter. But their martyrdom had helped keep the flame of Christianity alive in Rome. Constantine had taken an underground religion and staked all of Rome's glory on its success. Now the ambitions of a pope had brought ruin on the Holy City. The popes were to abandon Rome altogether and seek the protection of the kings of France. It seemed like the end. After 2,000 years as head of the world, the capital of emperors and popes, the very definition of sacred power, the city blessed by God was now cursed by invasion, intrigue, and depravity. Its sanctity debased. Holy no more. Time had run out for the eternal city. Next time, Rome rises from the ashes. How the debauchery and avarice of the Renaissance transformed Rome into the city we see today.
"50 years after the troops were sent in, new revelations about the Northern Ireland conflict tomorrow night. The Troubles, A Secret History at 8:30. Next tonight, from Jodhpur to Delhi, Michael Portillo continues his railway journey through India.